Welcome to Books the Biz, the show where real-world business meets real-world results. Hosted by business strategist Dan Paulson and veteran CFO Richard Beltry, this podcast breaks down the stories, trends, and financial insights shaping today's companies. Dan brings decades of experience helping leaders simplify operations, build strong cultures, and scale with confidence. Rich adds his deep financial expertise from guiding organizations across healthcare, construction, logistics, and professional services. Together, they dig into what's really happening behind the numbers and what it means for owners, executives, and anyone trying to grow a stronger, smarter business. This is practical conversation, real talk, and tools you can use right now. Welcome to Books the Biz.
Welcome back to Books the Biz. It is another exciting, rainy, cold, freezing episode here in Wisconsin. Rich, how is it out in New Jersey?
Wasn't it 70 degrees plus yesterday?
That was 2 days ago for us.
What is this junk?
So our weekly weather report here, definitely Midwest has gotten cold and rainy right now, and hopefully it'll warm up sometime again soon. But anyway, there's been a lot going on in the world. And while we won't get into all the political stuff of it, there are definitely ramifications for all the things that have been going on. And one of the main things business-wise that we've seen are cost increases. Costs due to fuel, costs due to tariffs, costs due to employment, wages, you name it. Everything seems to be going up in price. And I thought it'd be an interesting discussion for us to have, especially from a financial guy's side and from an operations guy's side, of why sometimes just the idea of raising your prices might not be good. Now, there are times when definitely you need to do it in order to maintain profitability. But there seems to be the common man's assumption that, well, if things are more expensive, you just jack the prices up and that'll do. But that's not always the case. And, I guess give me your input on what you see from raising prices versus not raising prices standpoint, especially when you see your costs going up in the background and trying to figure out how to maintain your profit margins.
Well, yeah, my biggest problem is when people don't actually know that their costs are increasing, or they think their costs are increasing. So, there's your first idea. Make sure that you know that this is what's going on. You're raising prices because of an economic factor. Is it going to stick around? Is it going away? What's the real reason why your costs are going up, and therefore you have to raise your prices. And then you have to figure out, is it absorbable? Is your customer base going to actually accept it, or are they going to walk? At that point, you raise your prices, and suddenly you have a bigger, different issue than what you were intending to attack. But that's the biggest fear that I have, is that people don't actually know; they just suspect, and then they go and they, make a quick decision because they don't want to deal. Almost they don't want to deal with it. So I'm not saying they all don't want to deal with it, but making a decision because they don't want to deal with it.
Well, and you often see these surcharges, and some of this might be a discussion for a different topic because it ties into this, but it's a little bit different. But here's an example that I've seen a lot recently: credit card fees. Now you go to a restaurant, and not only is your meal more expensive, but now when you go to pay via credit card, they're slapping you with a 3 to 5% credit card usage surcharge. Now, here's the funny part, and I know this to be fairly true, but I can't say it is for every restaurant or organization out there. They already built in that surcharge into their fees in the first place. So now they're tacking on an additional fee to cover the credit card usage and actually making more profit on that. And I have, again, I can't point to any one particular company uh, as an example. However, I do know people in the credit card industry that this has kind of been it's an issue that there's some awareness to. And technically, I think there's questions on whether or not it's legal to do, but nobody's really stopping it. So people are doing it. And I don't know if you know anything about that rule or not, but if there's one thing that ticks me off most is when I go to a restaurant and I'm paying already a higher cost, and then you're saying, okay, now we're going to tack on 3% because you're using a credit card. And here's where it really, really frustrates me is there are certain companies that are credit card only. They do not accept cash. So now they're forcing you to use the credit card, and then they're talking the credit card fee on top of that.
Yeah.
So this is more of a rant, I'd say, than a solution. But
that's all right.
We're going with this.
It's a rant every time I go to a restaurant. So I know the rule used to be that they weren't allowed to do that.
Yep.
But like you said, we all knew they were already baked in there somewhere. And now the law changed and said, no, they can do that. So all of a sudden the fee got added. Then you got the question of, well, who calculated the fee? Is the fee right? I'm not going to the restaurant with a calculator, to add 3%, or now all of a sudden I went to a restaurant a week or so ago and they added 4 or 5%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, your fee's not even the 3.
Right.
Like, you're charging me a 3% fee, and there's somebody coming into your office every 3 days trying to tell you that they're going to get you a lower credit card fee, And so I know you didn't pay the 3, and now you're charging me 4 or 5, And is it calculated on everything else? Is it calculated on the assumed tip? Is it calculated on the price? Is the sales tax removed before you charge it at 3%? Like, how am I supposed to check this receipt? It's only this big.
Right.
I mean, half the time, oh, you don't have to sign that. Of course I don't have to sign that. You don't want me to sign that because that means I looked at it. But you add it up and you start looking and saying, I can't understand this. It's costing a ridiculous fortune to go out to eat. It's not that I'm eating gold,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you're preparing for me because I'm asking you to. But it gets really, really annoying, that everybody feels like there's an excuse. And that law was an excuse to throw the kitchen sink onto the receipt. And then, so, consumer protectionism, what?
Mm-hmm.
So, take it out of the restaurant and you go down the line and you basically can say, if there's an excuse, they'll find a way to add it up because then they can blame it on everybody else. But when things get better, they don't go the other way.
Right.
The only way they're going to go the other way is when people stop coming into the store or they stop eating at the restaurant. And in most cases, it's not necessarily going to happen, at least not in enough to say this was a bad move and we're going to reverse. Most likely it's here to stay. So it's very difficult to as a consumer, it's difficult to deal with. And knowing that some of the people that are charging me for it, probably don't really have to charge the increased amount, but just this was an excuse, that annoys me. It annoys me a lot.
Yeah, I do think there is some tendency there where we are starting to see some pushback on that. And I'd say it's more in the fast food industry right now because they're probably the more price sensitive. I mean, when you're going to a steakhouse, you're already expecting to pay a higher fee. Mm-hmm. However, you also have to ask the question of that's a luxury food item versus, something that we consider fast food where we're grabbing a bite to eat between meetings or whatnot. We've seen the value meals pop back up. I believe probably one of the largest fast food chains that now has brought back their dollar menu. I don't know if it's exactly $1 anymore, but they were one of the first ones who jacked their prices up when we had our little pandemic scare going on, and inflation took over, and everything got bumped up really high, where it went from, it'd be a $7 or $8 meal to now you're paying $15 to $20 for the exact same meal. And now you're seeing the pendulum swing the other way, where now they're trying to get those prices back down.
Yeah.
So you do see this price sensitivity where people are going to push back. We look at the industries we deal with, like manufacturing, construction, logistics. Logistics, maybe you want to talk about this one. Logistics is huge right now because you have the cost of transportation that's going up because fuel prices have increased significantly with everything that's gone on in the last month. Not only that, you have certain compliance issues with certain states where you have to meet certain federal or certain state requirements for fuel efficiency, type of fuel that vehicle uses. Picking on you, California, how are you getting goods moved around, and what's the cost of doing that? Which then that's where we see, some of those costs passed on to us as consumers. However, you now start making choices on what you're going to buy and what you're not going to buy, and where you're going to buy it from. Yeah. And that's where, from an operations standpoint, I look at things and say, well, you can raise costs to a certain point, and sometimes your costs are too low. Because I would also say that, you're talking about people not knowing what their costs are. A lot of times I see people reluctant to raise prices because of fear that they will lose business. Unfortunately, the cost of that is now they don't have any profit margin, and with everything else going up, it puts their business at risk. Mm-hmm. So there's this fine balance you got to find. And maybe, again, you can elaborate from the financial side. Is there a calculation, or, what are the metrics you look at from a CFO side of things to say, yes, we should raise prices for this, or no, we need to back off. We need to find a different approach than just jacking our rates?
I don't know that there is a specific formula, because I think every business and every industry can be different. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely tell you, if you're one of those companies that's, somebody set up your QuickBooks and you don't actually know what your gross margin is, fix that. Like, you need to know that number, because that's going to tell you, are you making money on the product itself, on the shipment, on the delivery, on the everything, getting that to the customer. Are you making money before you have to pay everything that's related to office, etc., advertising? All that stuff should be below your gross margin. So if you're making money before gross margin, you want to know that. You want to analyze that. And that's where I think you can figure out, do I need to raise prices because I just can't make all the other things get paid without a sufficient enough margin on the sale of the product?
I'm going to let you dig into that a little bit further, because you again, being this with the CPA background, I would explain to people what gross margin is a little bit clearer, because I still am shocked, after doing what I do for 20 plus years, how many businesses don't understand how to calculate gross margin, whether they're in manufacturing or construction or anything else. Back to your, we've often used your money in a barrel example. Well, if there's money in the bucket, that means, I'm making profit. But people really don't understand how money is made. And I just look at the number of clients that go, well, I never read my P&Ls because I don't understand them anyway. So maybe you could kind of clear up, what's the basic calculation you should get to figure out what your gross margin is?
Sure. Basically, gross margin or gross profit, are the line where you take sales minus your cost of goods sold. That really is that simple. Although, if you don't know what those are, let's talk about cost of goods sold. Okay. Cost of goods sold is, if you're a distributor, that means that you're buying something from someone else and either reselling it or putting it into another piece of a product and then reselling the combined product. Well, what's the cost of getting that to either your warehouse or to your customer? There's a lot of people now that use, Amazon fulfillment, which basically Amazon fulfills it for you. You don't have a warehouse. You don't have, they are your warehouse.
Right.
Okay. The cost of getting that into that warehouse to be ready to ship, that's part of your cost of goods sold. the actual shipment to the customer can be, there's an argument all the time between accountants whether it should be in the cost of goods sold or whether that's a selling cost. But it should be somewhere thought about that there's shipping costs into your warehouse, there's shipping costs to your customer.
Right.
Okay. There are potentially other things that you do to the product, packaging, etc., that you will include in getting that ready to go to your customer. So you want to know that the sale price that you're selling, less all the costs that it took you to get that product, leads you to a profit before you pay all of your overhead, before you pay advertising costs, before you pay, your office manager, your bookkeeper, your accountant, your everybody else that's working for you, legal costs, everything that you use to run your business, does not really get factored in until you've already figured out, did I make a profit just on the item that I sold or the service that I provided? A lot of people tell me, you're a service business, we're not going to put cost of goods sold in there. And I'm like, I absolutely would put cost of goods sold in there. I would want to know if I'm putting people out there to provide a service and they're costing me more than I'm charging. That's a classic example of I've got to raise my prices, because either I have to raise my prices or I have to decrease the number of people I have out there because we're not providing an efficient service. So the gross margin becomes a really good piece that you should know. You should know if there's profitability before you pay all these other things, before you go and order, some big piece of software that you're all going to learn how to use and it's going to make you super efficient. Do you have the money to pay for it? Did you sell enough or provide enough services that you can now pay for that piece of equipment? So I want to know the gross margin. And everybody else on this call, anybody listening to this call, anybody watching us on YouTube, okay, you want to know that number. Okay, that is your pure profitability before you do all this other junk and pay for this, pay for the car that you're driving and everything else that's in there. Before you do that, are you making money?
And you brought up a good point that I was going to ask you about anyway, because I've seen this also fall on either side, but maybe a little more clarity on it as well. Where does labor go? Now, you mentioned when it's a service-based industry, your cost of goods sold might be the labor you're putting out there. So that would fall above that line. How about if you're a manufacturing facility? Do you include the materials plus the labor, or would that labor line move below the cost of goods sold line or the profit margin line?
The labor would be split. If they are responsible for the product, whether it's, in or out, that's a cost of getting that product to your customer. So you would want that included. I mean, look, we can have an argument about how to set it up and how to actually calculate it. But I think for the most part, the people that we're speaking to on this podcast, we're telling you it's custom. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's how you are going to be able to understand it. I would tell you to split the labor. I would say labor related to an actual product or an operation should be in cost of goods sold. Your back office, your salespeople, all that is below the line. It's below that gross margin line or gross profit line. Okay. But anybody that has a direct fit to getting the product or service out should be included in that cost of goods sold. Because if you're putting it below, you're thinking you're super profitable, but the people responsible for getting it into your warehouse and out to your customer are not in the number. So sure, you're going to look, if you leave stuff out, you're always going to look more profitable, but, put it where it's going to make sense to you. And if you don't understand it, ask questions. If you need other people to basically go over it with you, ask questions. Get them to explain it. And if you still can't get it, then there's something else wrong, that you don't have the information that you need, because your accounting people are supposed to be doing that. So you have the numbers. So you have the idea that this is not working. Why is this not working? So you should be asking until you're comfortable that you know why.
Yeah. And, the other side of this is kind of understanding where profit margins for your industry tend to lie. So what are best practices? Because as you point out, it's going to be all over the board. I look at coming from the restaurant industry, depending upon what you were doing, anywhere between 5 to 10% profit margin or net profit was really pretty decent. You're running pretty tight on something like that. Retail, it could be very similar too. You could be within a couple percentage points up to maybe 10% if you're lucky. Construction, I believe a lot of, especially small to medium contractors, try to target right around 20%, but in a lot of cases might even fall as low as 10% margin on that. Yet you go into service industries like IT and consulting, a lot of times they're 50% or higher margin on it because it tends to be more labor focused, less materials focused. So there's a little bit more control over that about where your margins lie there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have any good reference points of where people can go look up, where they should be at, or what's the best way to calculate where you need to be at the profit margins that you can make business, pay your employees, still put money away for yourself. Is there any factor that you tend to look at when you do that?
Off the top of my head, I wish I had written a couple of them down. But to be honest with you, if you know anybody who's in the mergers and acquisitions area, ask them. It's one of the first things that they look at because they figure out, is this an industry I even want to be in, and can I manage it within certain parameters? So then they go and they look at, and of course I'm going to blank out, but they go and they look at some of these services and they go by the code. There's a code for each industry, and whatever code that you're in, all of the statistics that they can get within that code get accumulated so that they can come up with reasonable, metrics that they can use to say, this is what we're looking for. And I think that people can ask them, well, what do you think? What should those, percentages be? I usually go look them up when I'm dealing with an industry. Where is the number that I need to be at? So I would tell you, ask people that that are in that mergers and acquisitions arena, and they probably have a resource already that, they might be able to pull some key stats up for the industry.
Yep. And I'm assuming the code you're looking for is the SIC code, the standard industry code.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that is a federally designed code system, basically, right? And this, can't remember, is it 6 characters, 5 characters?
I think it's 6.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I know on tax returns they usually make you put in the 6.
Yep.
So they're accumulating their own stats.
Yep. And those actually, I think it can go as low as 4 too. So there's your kind of general category, and then once you get to 6, it's more finite within that category where things are at. But here's something where AI, and I use this with caution, can help you kind of figure out, because you can do some searches. Now, I don't recommend AI being your only tool, but it is a tool where you can type in, give me the standard industry code for a fill in the blank, manufacturing company in electrical conduit or something like that. It'll give you the code for that. And if you even ask, you might get the profit margin. Now, as you point out, back check that against somebody who's actually in the industry. So a merger acquisition company, an accountant that might specialize in that particular industry could be a good way to do that. But there's a number of different ways now that you can pretty quickly find out and get fairly close to accurate on where you should fall at for profit margins. Now, at that point, you then have to decide industry tolerance. Are you in a market, for example, where you can pull in a higher profit margin than standard? Or are you in a more competitive area where it might be lower? And I think this is kind of leveled out a little bit because of the internet, and because we no longer kind of work within our town or our county or even our state. We can pretty much do business almost anywhere in the world anymore. So we've gotten a lot more price sensitive on stuff, because you can go, as you pointed out, you can go to Amazon and you can find that exact same product sold through several different sources, and it's going to be at different price points all along the way.
Yep.
Yeah. So with all this being said, what are some recommendations from a financial standpoint that you would kind of walk somebody through, and just keep it general because again, we don't know the industry or the company, but if you were hired to come in and say, okay, I need to know what my pricing structure should be, what are typically the areas you're going to start looking at?
Well, number one, know your numbers. If I'm not saying off the top of your head, I'm saying have them.
Yep.
Understand what your specific numbers are. Know that gross margin. Because it's a really fast. You get into a really fast effect, and you start realizing something's trending the wrong way. Then that should lead you to, I can dig in here because something's going on. And then I think once you get past that, understand your customer base. Make sure that you can consider whether or not the customers are going to leave if you change pricing, if you change the structure, and then you'll know what to do after that. You'll be able to make decisions.
Yeah, and from the operations end, I tend to look at a little bit differently, but I'm looking for ways to find money. Where can we find money through efficiency? Where can we find money through uniqueness in our product or service model? Because everyone will say they have quality products, they have great customer service. I have yet to find a company that's going to say we have absolutely crappy products and our service sucks, and you should pay us more for it. So you got to figure out different ways to market to that. But a lot of cases in the operations realm, you can use technology, you can use better tools when it comes to managing people or managing process that can usually find savings anywhere from 5 to 15%, depending upon what you're looking at, because we tend to get inefficient over time. And I actually was meeting with a client this week, and we were kind of talking about their meetings and their process and how their project flow is. And even the owner said, we just make things too complicated. It should literally be this, and this, and that should be it. Mm-hmm. So we're actually in the process of finding ways to streamline that, because over time, we tend to overcomplicate things for various reasons. So from an operations side, if you can find those opportunities to smooth things out and make yourself more efficient, you might not have to raise your prices to see a higher profit margin. Yeah. And that's another benefit of knowing your numbers and knowing where to look, or having somebody help you figure out where to look.
Yep.
So, Rich, if they want to get a hold of us and figure out, maybe through our 20 questions approach, help them find out where some of these gaps are at, or where some of these bottlenecks are at, how do they get a hold of us?
The best way to get a hold of me is by email at rich@xcxo.net.
And you can do the same with me at dan@xcxo.net. And I do recommend you check out our 20 questions approach, because we can find out a lot of information about hours worth of time with you and give you back a report to show you where you can start looking or what you can start digging into. Rich, great conversation. As we're getting closer to tax time here, I know we already talked about a couple of hot topics for you more than me, but we can address those in the next coming weeks. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to Books and the Biz. If today's conversation sparked new ideas for your company, the team at XCXO can help you turn those ideas into action. XCXO brings together seasoned executives, fractional CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and CXOs who step into your business with the experience, strategy, and leadership to drive real results. Whether you're trying to scale, strengthen operations, improve profitability, or prepare for transition, our experts help you move faster and lead with confidence. To learn more or start a conversation, visit xcxo.net. That's xcxo.net, your shortcut to stronger leadership and a better run business. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time on Books and the Biz.